Welcome back into Sports Blitz Live. Luke Robinson here, joined by a very special guest, maybe the most famous guest that we get to have on this program, and it's Rece Davis from ESPN. A lot of you know him from College Football Live or from the College Football Game Day or any number of programs on ESPN, and he's been with ESPN for quite some time, and he is also an alumnus of the University of Alabama, and recently he was able to tour Tuscaloosa and see some of the horrific damage that these tornadoes caused in the last couple of weeks. And Rece, thanks so much for joining us, first of all.
Oh, Luke, it's my pleasure. Happy to be with you.
So, Rece, a lot of people saw the Sports Center segment that you did where you actually go back to Tuscaloosa and you go through the campus and you go through the town and you talk a little bit about where your apartment was, and ironically, it was virtually unscathed. But talk about the damage and what it was like riding through Tuscaloosa with so much that has gone on there.
Well, you know, I think it's just a stark contrast as to where the destruction starts and the other parts where it's still as pristine as ever. I mean, if you take a ride down University on campus by Denny Chimes, you wouldn't know anything happened. You know, it's beautiful there, but just, you know, I don't know, a couple blocks away in a shorter distance than that, probably in a straight line or as the crow flies, as they say, and it's, you know, it's utter devastation. And you know, there's so many other areas of Tuscaloosa that you know, were hit hard. It's really, you know, it's sort of mind-boggling when you think about the number of structures that were wiped out, and it's really heartbreaking when you stop and think about the number of lives that were lost, people that were injured, people who lost children, you know, children who lost parents. It's really, you know, it's sort of an overwhelming story, and it's certainly one that's going to take quite some time to recover from, not only in Tuscaloosa, but in all other parts of the state that were affected as well.
Okay, Rece, a lot of people have talked about all the damage and what it's going to take to recover and how many lives were lost. What did you see in your travels to Tuscaloosa that gave you hope for the future, for the city and for the state of Alabama?
The spirit of the people, the resiliency, and the willingness for people to go so far beyond the typical call of duty to help their neighbors. And that's what our story was about. And, you know, Luke, one of the problems I had in trying to write that story and craft the story is that you didn't want anybody to feel like that, you know, you were overlooking the contributions they made. But our little bitty slice of the story was the cooperative effort between Alabama fans and Auburn fans, and particularly the Tumors for Tuscaloosa group. And their ability to mobilize through social media and really have a positive impact and to positively affect the recovery process was nothing short of amazing. So many other groups are doing it too. I know the Greek community at Alabama is doing an unbelievable job. The Red Cross, now that they're in, you know, and the other groups, you know, the Tide washing detergent people had loads of hope. They had a thing set up out by University Mall where they were doing laundry. I mean, you know, it's everybody doing so many different things to try to impact the recovery was awesome. You know, what Nick Saban is doing through Nick and Terry Saban through Nick's Kids Foundation, the Sweet Home Fund that Anthony Grant has set up. And I had a conversation with Anthony just a couple of days ago. He's still looking for more ways to try to help. And, you know, you're talking about people in very prominent positions in our state, and I still call it that because it's my home. In our state, the football coach particularly, but also anybody in a position of prominence athletically, has an ability to motivate people to help. People are already self-motivated, but I think giving them avenues the way that Nick Saban has through Nick's Kids, through the way Anthony has through the Sweet Home Fund and the so many other things that they're trying to do, those are the things that stick out to me. The willingness of people to find whatever they can do, whether it's donating money, time, resources, clothes, equipment, manpower, trucks. You know, there was a guy, the Tumors for Tuscaloosa people moved a 200-gallon gas tank. The girl also told me that she'd gotten an airplane moved at some point to I guess, to get something somewhere that they needed. And it's, you know, people were just doing it. They weren't sending anybody a bill for it. They were just doing it to try to help. And to me, that's the biggest reason that I don't have hope for recovery for Alabama. I know it will, and it's because of the spirit and the caring nature and the character of their people.
Well, Rece, I know that most people at ESPN probably do at least have somewhat of an understanding of the Alabama-Auburn rivalry, but that to me is what makes this story even better, is that you see people really blurring the lines of Alabama and Auburn to help one another. And if you know, it makes it so much special if you know how much hatred there is in the rivalry. Do your colleagues at ESPN understand that?
I don't, Luke, to be honest, I don't think they do. Not totally. They do sort of, but I think that they think of it as a more intense Yankees-Red Sox type of rivalry. Now, some of them understand it. Our college football people understand it. Or at least most of them do, I think. But, you know, I mean, this thing, and you know this better than I do, living there, but at least it appears to me right now that prior to this tragedy, that the vitriolic nature, that the level of animosity and intensity had really ratcheted up for a number of reasons. One is probably purely competitive with the, you know, back-to-back national championships and back-to-back Heisman trophies, the way the game went this past season, the recruiting issues between the two. You know, I think that all of those things had served to ratchet up the level of animosity between the fans. Not so much between the players or between the two administrations or the coaches or anything like that, but I think between the fans. And this tragedy really, I think, made people take stock of where that rivalry should sit in their lives. And, you know, I'm not one to try to tell people what they should care about. And I don't like it when people say you shouldn't care so much about the rivalry. Well, that's what makes it great. But I do think that there are times to put it aside and to realize that while it might be intense and it might be all-consuming at times, that there's a place to compartmentalize it. And certainly this is one of those situations. And I think the Auburn people working in Tuscaloosa did a great job of that. And let's not forget the other side, too. I said this to someone earlier today. The tornado didn't just hit Alabama people. You know, it hit Auburn fans and Phil Campbell and Hackleburg and up in the northeast corner of the state. It hit them, too. And Pleasant Grove and Pratt City. It hit Auburn people, too. So Auburn people helped Alabama people helped Auburn people, and that's the way it should be. There are times when the rivalry, as great as it is, as intense as it is, as bitter as it can be, just needs to be compartmentalized, and I think that the people of Alabama did a wonderful job of that, and they are doing a wonderful job of that.
And Rece, I think you're absolutely right, and I appreciate, and everybody in the state of Alabama appreciates your efforts to help get these stories out there, because it's important to do these. I'm telling you, it was hard to not tear up a little watching the story on SportsCenter and understanding what some of these people have gone through. And it's one thing when you see something horrific like Hurricane Katrina or whatever, but when it happens in your state and it touches so close to home, it really touches you. And I think that everybody in this community of Alexander City has certainly been touched by the whole situation. We've had our own fair share of damage, but nothing like, of course, what happened to the communities of Hackleburg or Phil Campbell or Tuscaloosa, and you're doing a great job of getting the message out there, and everybody truly appreciates that. But now, Rece, I want to talk about football just for a second, because we very rarely get you into such a special thing, and you know so much about it. Talk about the status of college football right now. I mean, you look at Ohio State. I mean, they are mired in controversy. I mean, there is so much going on at Ohio State, which, you could make the argument for the past 10 years has been the preeminent program in college football. You've had USC go on pretty big-time probation here lately. Oregon's had its fair share of rumors. Of course, there are rumors everywhere throughout the Southeastern Conference. Is the college football world sort of eating its own right now?
Well, I think there are so many layers and levels to the situation, Luke. One, I think that there are no secrets anymore because of social media, internet message boards. Everybody has a forum now. So, a lot of schools complain because they spend a lot of their time checking out stuff that is just bogus. Somebody's accused them of something. It didn't happen. It didn't come close to happening, but they waste manpower on it. That's one problem. A second problem is the fact that it's hard to police the number of people that administrations, teams, schools are being asked to police in terms of making sure they all do the right thing. So those are a couple of issues, I think, as to why it's happening. Now, there are other issues that I think are a little bit deeper that are causing some of this. I think that the way the money has escalated for schools, for coaches, for programs, and the players aren't getting any of it, I think that there is a little bit of a feeling among, at least in some quarters, of, well, what's really the big deal about this? I'm trading, I'm trading something that really, I've got, the gold pants trinket, you would like for Ohio State kids to really value that because they are important for beating Michigan. But they've beaten Michigan so often, they probably all just thought, well, either got 4 of them or I'll get another pair next year. So they trade them for tattoos or whatever, and it's against the rules. Which brings me to my next point. Why is that against the rule? That's their stuff. And now I realize that you don't want a system where a Terrelle Pryor is able to take some memento and make $250,000 on it. But if he can sell it on eBay and make $1,000, it's his stuff. And I say all that to say I believe that while they should be punished because everybody's supposed to play by the rules as they are right now, I think it's high time that amateurism gets redefined. And I think that the NCAA needs to either reinvent itself or there needs to be another governing body. Now, there has to be a governing body, there have to be rules for people to abide by, and there has to be a punishment when those rules aren't followed. But, the notion of some of the stuff that we're, people are getting in trouble about is preposterous. Boise State, one of their deals that led them to failure to monitor, lack of institutional control or whatever, was for $2.34. That's ridiculous. The whole Dez Bryant thing. Dez Bryant lost the rest of his eligibility. He didn't commit a violation, at least until he got scared and wasn't truthful. Now, I'm not defending him not being untruthful, but, that's the kind of climate there is right now, I think, is that the players, the schools think that somebody's out to get them rather than help them, at least in some quarters. Now, they'll give lip service the other way. But, for a player who hadn't done anything wrong to be intimidated to the point that he didn't tell the truth about having dinner with Deion Sanders or whatever, it's not a violation. It's just not. And it shouldn't be. And, here's my idea, Luke. I think at some point, now I'm not saying the schools should pay them, but, and Jay Billis and I have talked about this a lot in basketball. If somebody, let's use Mark Ingram for an example, or Cam Newton, either one of those guys. Let's say Cam Newton came back next year, or Mark Ingram after last season after he'd won a Heisman Trophy. If a car dealer in Tuscaloosa wants Ingram to make a commercial for him, well, why shouldn't he? I mean, if there was a great music student at Alabama or Auburn, and they were, going to get a record deal or something on their potential, they could cash in on their talent. I don't know why athletes are held to a different standard. It's a different deal. College scholarships are still valuable.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rece.
The rest the rest of the money has escalated, and what the players get has not followed in kind.
No, I totally agree with you. In fact, you could take it a step further and say, let's talk about the Terrelle Pryor situation. If Terrelle Pryor had just given those pants to a friend of his, let's say, and then that friend decided to go on eBay and sell those pants, he probably would have gotten $1,500 for them, and that friend can keep the money, and Terrelle Pryor gets nothing. I just think that if you give a player something, he should be able to sell it for whatever he wants to. And I'm not really advocating paying them a salary per se, but I think that if they get something and want to sell it, why can't they sell it?
Yeah, and I think they ought to be able to market themselves, and they ought to be able to have marketing agents. I mean, it is what it is. You know, I mean, that's a stupid thing to say because how can it be something that it's not? But, you know, we have the dynamics have changed.
Right.
Money has changed. The exposure has changed. And I think the definition of amateurism has changed. Now, will there be people who try to skirt those rules or go beyond whatever parameters might be set in place for, you know, for a guy to make money on his status or notoriety? Sure. And you have to have some type of governing and enforcement body to control that. But I think this notion that you can't buy a guy a ham sandwich is pretty ridiculous. And it probably needs to be changed in some way.
I think you're right on target there, Rece, and certainly do understand exactly what you're saying. But going back to Ohio State, while I think Terrelle Pryor maybe is getting somewhat of a bad rap in this situation, I certainly don't advocate the way Jim Tressel has handled it, which really goes against everything he's ever preached, if you ask me. Jim Tressel has painted himself as this father figure to the world who is the standard for truth and the standard for morality, yet he lied to the NCAA. He tried to cover up things that obviously, I mean, were right there on his email, and I feel like he really, at this point, I don't understand why he still has a job.
I think he is in a very similar situation. I don't know that it's clear that he didn't disclose everything. Maybe the subtle difference between Jim's situation and Bruce Pearl's situation, the basketball coach in Tennessee, was that Bruce actually went into an actual sit-down meeting with the NCAA and was asked a direct question about a specific piece of evidence and didn't tell the truth. Now, Bruce went back later and fessed up. Maybe there's a subtle difference there. But I think that by and large, that Tressel's in a very similar situation to Pearl. And he's also in a similar situation because the administration at Ohio State, just like the administration at Tennessee, would prefer to keep the coach employed because he's been very successful. And you know what? Both are excellent coaches and good guys. I mean, I know Bruce and I know Jim, and I think a lot of them. And, you know, I understand, but given the climate and given where the Big Ten has tried to set itself and has followed that admirably, you know, in terms of being a leader and trying to avoid scandal and so forth and do it the right way and follow the rules and all of those types of things. And given as you mentioned, where Jim has placed himself in terms of being a bastion of integrity and so forth, and I think Jim is a guy who is full of integrity. Maybe it didn't manifest itself in this particular instance, but I think Jim Tressel is a good man, and I think he's good for college football, and I think he's good for the kids. But given the climate and other guys who've been in similar situations, it is difficult to see how he is going to long-term be able to survive this situation because it may come down to a deal just as it did with Pearl at Tennessee. The cost of keeping him just becomes too great.
Yeah, you're right, Rece, and I go back to Dez Bryant when I talk about Jim Tressel. Look, I don't doubt that he's a good person, and I think that he made a mistake, a pretty serious mistake. But Dez Bryant did the same thing, told a quote-unquote white lie about one situation that seems pretty innocuous on the surface, and he lost his entire season. Jim Tressel, who is supposed to be the mentor to these children, or to these kids, young adults, he told a lie and went back and covered it up and kept playing it out. And then finally he gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and I just have a hard time understanding why Dez Bryant would lose a year or even A.J. Green lose 4 games, yet Jim Tressel only gets 5 games. It just doesn't seem equitable to me.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. It is an inequitable situation. The A.J. Green punishment I did not think fit the crime. It calls to mind something that a former player told me one time that their compliance director told them in their early season meeting, that if you are tempted to take a free T-shirt or free shoes or a discount on lunch or anything of the sort, he said, instead, go ahead and go out and rob a bank, because then they'll catch you and put you in jail. And he said, and at least then the punishment will fit the crime. He said, but if you take a free sandwich or a free shirt from somebody, he said the punishment will not fit the crime, and the sentence that is handed down to you will not be equitable with how much you enjoyed that free sandwich. You know, so he told me, if you're tempted to do it, just go rob a bank instead, because when you're in jail, you'll go at least, at least I robbed the bank. At least I know I should be in jail.
And Rece, thanks so much for being with us. Certainly do appreciate your time. Have a good day, bud.
All right, Luke. Talk to you soon.
That was Rece Davis of ESPN. Certainly do appreciate his being with us. Rece is a fantastic guest, and again, like I said, an alumnus of the University of Alabama, so certainly he has a lot of strong feelings about everything that's gone on in Tuscaloosa recently. We're going to be back in just a minute with more Sports Blitz Live.